the VIB. We are so glad that you've joined us. You're going to love today's episode. It is about the books in the Bible called the Gospels. Welcome to episode 2 of the VIB. We are so glad you're here. We're studying the Gospels. Nothing from you guys?
Sorry, Aunty Elle. I was just reading a thrilling book about the rise and fall of the Roman currency. It reminds me of a film I watched as a young pachyderm on the printing of the Zimbabwean dollar.
Joe, remember we're not talking about that.
Oh, sorry, Aunty Elle. It's just so fascinating. The way everything goes up and then down, and the economy
Do you
travels.
guys mind? I'm reading a book here.
Well, actually, Thoko, I kind of do mind because the kids are already there and we've started episode 2 and we need you. But it is nice when you're in the middle of an exciting book, so why don't you tell us what you're reading?
Okay, so the frog is finally gonna do the thing, but the pig still doesn't think it's a good thing. But the other animals think it's the best thing. But nobody understands that he was born not to do the thing. But the frog is still going ahead. It's a disaster, don't you think? Well, what do you think?
How, in all reasonableness, can we possibly be asked to understand what's going on in your scattered brain?
Oh, be kind. Thoko, Joe is a little right that we're going to have to know more about the beginning of the story for it to make any sense to us. A book without a beginning is a little confusing.
Oh man! I've been ripped off. I've been duped. I've been destroyed. Left.
Oh no, why are you so upset, Rodwell?
Sherlock Holmes was just about to find out who was the person who had done the thing. His last words were which leaves only you, Mister. Mister who? It could be anybody.
Oh no, let me have a look. What is happening? Rodwell?
Yeah.
The last pages in this book are ripped out, or burnt, I think.
I'm not going to get into the details, but I remember there was an incident with the rocket and my bookshelf.
Oh no,
Young people
Rodwell.
today have no respect for literature.
Oh, easy. Well, Rodwell, there is nothing worse than not being able to hear the end of a story.
Or how it begins, right, Thoko?
Right, silly giraffe. Today's show is actually about 2 books just like that. A book that doesn't have an ending and a book that doesn't have a beginning. The 2 parts of the Bible, the Old Testament and the New Testament. The Old Testament is a book without an ending, and the New Testament is a book without a beginning. And the only way we can understand the whole story is if we read both parts together. They're like a puzzle that only makes sense if we have both parts.
Wait. Why are we starting to read the VI Bible in the middle? Why are we making our lives difficult? This is like the time when Stuart and his wife Martha and I went on a picnic by the mining site. And I thought they were bringing deviled eggs and pickled fish. And they thought I was bringing tuna puffs. And it turned out we all brought dessert. And it was a complete disaster.
Okay, I guess it is a little bit like going to a picnic and not having all the parts there. But actually, starting at this place in the Bible is not a very bad part to start. It's because it's the part that introduces the main character of the Bible, Jesus. It's kind of like the heart of the Bible, the part where all the promises made in the Old Testament get fulfilled in the life of Jesus. There are 4 books in the Gospel. There's Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And Gospel means good news, and that's kind of an understatement because it's about the very best news. God Himself making a plan to come to earth and rescue the people He loves.
Wait, I have a question.
Yes, Thoko?
If it's the story of the life of Jesus, why are there 4 books? I mean, could they not get it right the first 3 times?
Oh, actually, that's quite a good question, Thoko.
Wait, I can answer that.
Let's hear it, Rodwell.
At a crime scene, they always ask different witnesses what happens so that they can get the whole picture of the story. I read that in a book with no ending.
Oh, sorry, Rodwell, but you're absolutely right. The different Gospels are different parts, different authors writing the same story, the story of the life and death and resurrection of Jesus. The one that was written first isn't first in our Bible, but it's Mark, and he wrote down what the disciple Peter told him about the life of Jesus. And then later, Matthew, who was also a disciple, and Luke, who we think was a doctor, wrote the same story again as they witnessed it. And then finally there's John, who doesn't quite write the same. He tells us more about what it all means when Jesus spoke and acted. John actually makes me laugh because he keeps saying that, referring to himself as the disciples Jesus loved.
That's like me saying I'm the person on the show that Aunty Elle loves best.
No, that's not true.
Okay.
Aunty Elle isn't allowed favorites, and surely Jesus doesn't have either.
I think Rodwell is right. Jesus doesn't have favorites, but I do love how when you read the story of his life, you feel he is especially fond of you. In fact, everything he did, everything he said, pointed to his especial huge love for each one of us.
That's really cool.
I think it's cool too, guys. Remember when I said that the gospel tells the story of how Jesus fulfilled all the promises made in the Old Testament? Well, we'll go back later and look at some of those history writings and prophecy writings, and all of them will point to these big promises that Jesus fulfills. Also in the Old Testament, God has a kingdom, a group of people that he had chosen to be his special friends. The Old Testament is a literal kingdom. That's a kingdom we can see, a kingdom that we can touch. The New Testament, when Jesus comes, he says there's a different kind of kingdom, a bigger one, a spiritual kingdom, one in which not just a small group of people, but all of us are invited.
I love being invited to stuff.
Oh, me too, Joe. And you know what? Jesus didn't just tell us about this magnificent kingdom. He gave something very special, a huge gift that would be like the payment for us to be able to be invited to the kingdom.
Was it a puppy?
No, it wasn't a puppy.
Was it a tie with little ties in the ties, and then you could tie it around your big tie, and then you have an awesome tie?
No, it
Was
wasn't.
it the end of my book?
Oh, these are all great suggestions, but it was even better than that. Jesus gave himself. He willingly died so that the big price could be paid that would give each one of us access to this magnificent kingdom that he will reign over. But you know what's the coolest part, guys? He didn't stay dead. He rose from the dead on the 3rd day and seen by hundreds of people over the weeks to come. And then one day, with his disciples watching, he rose up into heaven from where he said he will come one day and completely and finally rule over this wonderful new kingdom we all get to be a part of. But more about that next week.
I have more questions. What now? What happens after he gave himself as a big gift? What did his disciples do? What happens at the end of Rodwell's birth?
Oh, Thoko, these are great questions. You're all going to have to come back next week for episode 3 of the VIB. Woo!